finding human skeletons, they were finding stone spear points, they were finding mortars and pestles, hundreds of them at dozens of locations. Now, all these were gathered together, reported to the scientific world by J.D. Whitney, who was the state geologist of California. And he published a massive book about them by Harvard University. Harvard University was the publisher. Now, what happened to these artifacts? Why aren't they on display in museums? Why aren't our children taught about them in schools? There was a very powerful anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution named William H. Holmes. And he said to Whitney, you, Dr. Whitney, if you had understood the theory of human evolution as we understand it today, you would have hesitated to announce your conclusion, namely that human beings existed millions of years ago, despite the imposing array of facts with which you were confronted. In other words, simply because the facts didn't fit the theory, the facts had to go, and so did Professor Whitney. And a vast amount of evidence showing that human beings like ourselves have been around for millions of years has been systematically suppressed. And I can give you some examples. For example, in 1979, Mary Leakey, who's one of the most famous archaeologists of this century, discovered in Africa completely modern human footprints, no different from the footprints that you or I would make on a beach today. Now, the thing about these footprints is they were found in rock that was dated 3.6 million years old. And that throws out completely any idea of human origins that's current today.
Why would anyone want information like that suppressed? What possible advantage would there be in that?
Well, power, prestige, money, there's a lot riding on it. If even one of the hundreds of cases that we document were found to be true, accepted, that would mean that everything we've been told about human origins and antiquity for the past 150 years is simply not true. And I don't think that the current establishment is ready to admit that.
I think that scientists find it harder in some ways than many other people, you see, and some other people, because there's still a strong commitment, even perhaps partly unconscious, to the old atomistic worldview.
So what you're saying is that science has shown us something that scientists do not want to see?
Well, they have become so used to the way of seeing it that they don't want to change it. You see, they feel uncomfortable about changing it, and they feel there's no reason to change it. Many of them, they say, well, we're doing so well now, why should we change it? In one sense, it looks as if we're doing very well, you see, but if you look at the broader view, it looks very dangerous.
In the 1840s, there was a scientific magazine called The Geologist, and it reported that in Macoupin County, Illinois, which is right here in North America, in the United States, a human skeleton, just like ours, had been uncovered in a coal mine, in solid coal 90 feet deep underneath the ground. Now, Richard Thompson and I were able to discover from the reports exactly where that occurred. And we talked to the Geological Survey of the state of Illinois, and we asked them, well, how old is the coal there? And it turned out it was 300 million years old, which means it's older than the Jurassic, you know, that word that everybody knows now, that refers to the dinosaurs. In other words, it was older than the age of the dinosaurs.
Wow. Okay, so that throws a whole new spin on it.
Yes, indeed it does. And some of the scientists who have read the book have obviously recognized that. For example, William Howells, who is one of the big anthropologists of this century, one of the architects of the current paradigm, he said, well, if what you say here is true, it more or less throws a monkey wrench into our whole picture of how life originated on this planet. And I think it does.
So, but yet we keep coming around to the same thing. People just don't want to believe it. They just, like you said, well, they're skeptical. They go, oh, no, that's just a hoax. They're not hearing the information that noted scientists are finding.
Well, all we really wanted to do in our book
is put the facts on the table, all of them, not just the facts that you will see in the current textbooks, but all of the facts that are relevant to this whole subject, and let people draw their own conclusions.
One of the questions I first came up with when I was reading the book that you did answer in the book that I'd like you to explain was that I said, well, gee, don't we have all these machines now that can look at the footprints or the bones or whatever, and that will just tell us how old it is?
Oh, this is a very common perception. We have such faith in technology and those who employ it that when we hear about things like carbon-14 testing or potassium-argon testing, we think it really is a very simple process, almost like you pop something in the microwave and boom, it comes out. It's not like that at all. These are very complicated procedures. What I found in practice is that scientists may run several tests on the same piece of bone. Some of the ages will be very great, some very small, and they will tend to pick the date to publish in their scientific literature that most fits the idea that they start out with about how old the fossil should be. Now that often happens.
What do scientists and researchers have to gain by distorting their findings? I mean, you would think that if they truly think that they found evidence of man pre-existing the dates that we take for granted right now, that they would want to be published, that they would want people to hear about this, that they would get their name up in lights, as it were, as making this remarkable discovery. Why is this so suppressed?
Well, there are tremendous pressures for conformity within the scientific community. For example, for every academic post that opens up, every professorship that opens up in an American university, there are generally hundreds of applicants. And it does not help your reputation if you go reporting things that should not be reported. It could be very bad for one's reputation. And in our book, we document several cases of that. For example, Virginia Steen McIntyre. She's a geologist who I personally know. She lives in Colorado now. She went to Mexico in the 1970s, and she was a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. She dated a site there where some human artifacts have been found at 300,000 years. All her test results show that that was the age of that site. But because that went against the dominant idea that human beings have only been in North America for 30,000 years, she said she was not able to get the report published. She was labeled a publicity seeker and a maverick in her community of scholars, and she said she eventually lost a professorship that she held at an American university because of this, and hasn't been able to work as a geologist since. Now, this is not the normal picture that we have of how science works, but unfortunately, these are the sorts of things that can happen, and these are the sorts of pressures that can be applied in order to keep a certain view intact.
So what do people need to do now? They apparently, we need the public to open their minds up a little bit more to alternative ideas to what we've been taught.
Well, I think one thing we need to do is develop a little bit more of a healthy skepticism towards pronouncements from spokespersons from the scientific community. Just as we've learned not to accept without question every pronouncement that may come from the press secretary of a politician or the public relations office of a corporation. We may want to dig a little further, keep an open mind, have some healthy skepticism, and I think perhaps we've placed spokespersons from the scientific community on a little bit of a pedestal, and we may need to give them the same sort of treatment that we would give to spokespersons from other groups in society.
Let's just put the facts on the table and look at them and see how they've been dealt with. It shouldn't matter, you know, what your motive is. It's like bowling. If you bowl a strike, who cares if you're doing it for this reason or another? I mean, facts are facts. Now, the facts that we've uncovered...
Well, we know statistics can be distorted for whichever way someone wants them to be distorted. We know that.
Right.
You and I could take the same statistic and change it around and make it look different.
So let's look at them.
You have talked in terms of the fact that scientists don't cheat. That's a myth. You say there's actual cheating going on.
Oh, that's very well documented. For example, the Piltdown case is a very famous case that documents that. Now, what that has to do with is early in this century, there was a purported discovery of an ape man in England based on a skull and a jawbone. And this Piltdown ape man was in the science textbooks for about 40 years. And then suddenly it was revealed that the British Museum had tested these fossils and determined that it was a very elaborate hoax. And many people have speculated about the identity of the person who was the hoaxer, and practically all of them center on different scientists in England, such as Sir Grafton Elliott Smith or Sir Arthur Smith Woodward, all very well-established scientists in England, because only somebody who knew the scientific method very well could have prepared these fossils in such a way that they would have fooled the scientific community all around the world for 40 or 50 years. So some scientist who wanted to perhaps give some evidence in favor of evolution, because there's not very much of it, invented this ape man, and in a very sophisticated way cheated, literally. And this is admitted by the scientists themselves. And there are more examples I could give.
Evidence that goes against human evolution is reported only by crackpots.
Now this is one of the standard techniques that the scientific community tries to use against anybody that reports something that goes against their ideas. They try to label them in a derogatory way without actually discussing the facts. And I think we've all had experience of that. But the real facts is that actual scientists have, over the past 150 years, reported many astounding facts that go against the theory of evolution. And the present scientific community doesn't want people to know that. They want to promote the idea that anybody that's against evolution is somehow or other a religious fanatic, a crackpot, but it's simply not true. And I've personally met scientists who have discovered some of these things, and what happens to them is it's very unfair, the treatment to which they are subjected.
We're going to go to Anton in Brookfield, Wisconsin. Anton, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Your comment.
I've often wondered how the perfect complementary male-female systems of reproduction could have evolved from unintelligent life forms.
You know, Anton, not only is that a good question, but also the point is if evolution occurred, it'd have to be simultaneous evolution of both species at the same time.
Right.
Because if it took 1 million years for the female to evolve, it would have kind of messed up the whole procreation thing, wouldn't it?
Right. That's my question.
A good question. Stay right there. Michael Cremo, your response.
Well, I would like to put together a book called Darwin's Fairy Tales. And I think that would be one of them. You can just look at so many examples of complex structures and behaviors in different creatures, whether it's how the spider learned to spin its web, or how our human reproduction system came about, or any of these things. They're a complete mystery. They're not explained even theoretically by the evolutionist, and what they do is, when they want to explain anything, they just wave their magic wand and said, it happened by evolution. And that's why I call it Darwin's fairy tales.
If you were to predict what archaeologists might find, you would say, well, they would tend to find a very bewildering mixture of anatomically modern human fossils, ape-man-like fossils, crude stone tools, articles indicative of a higher level of culture, all sort of mixed up and going back, hundreds of millions of years. Mm-hmm. I think you might also predict that given the biases of investigators towards a linear progressive idea of time, with things beginning in a very simple state and progressing in a linear fashion to a more advanced state, that they might edit that record to conform to their linear progressive biases. And indeed, both predictions we found in our investigations do come true. You actually do have that very bewildering, mixture of advanced artifacts and bones mixed up with more primitive ones, going back hundreds of millions of years. And you also do find a very systematic editing of this record to conform to a linear, progressive, you might call it evolutionary view of things, which is quite amazing.
Of course, if we have this sort of cyclical picture, circular picture of things, much of conventional science will need to be readjusted.
Where would we be? What would we lose? Well, unfortunately, I no longer need to imagine. It's happening. We are losing our freedom in one of the most important sectors of society, science. I have always assumed that scientists were free to ask any question, to pursue any line of inquiry without fear of reprisal. But recently, I've been alarmed to discover that this is not the case. It all began when I met evolutionary biologist Richard Sternberg in Washington, D.C. His life was nearly ruined when he strayed from the party line while serving as editor of a scientific journal affiliated with the prestigious Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Your office was over there?
That's correct. This here is the West Wing. Directly ahead of us is the West Wing of the Natural History Museum.
So now you're not there anymore because you're a bad boy.
No, I'm not. No, I was exiled.
You're a bad boy. You question the powers that be. What was Dr. Sternberg's crime? He dared to publish an article by Dr. Stephen Meyer, one of the leading lights of the intelligent design movement. The paper ignited a firestorm of controversy merely because it suggested intelligent design might be able to explain how life began. As a result, Dr. Sternberg lost his office, his political and religious beliefs were investigated, and he was pressured to resign.
The questioning of Darwinism was a bridge too far for many. The mentioning of intelligent design that occurs at the end of the paper was over the top. And I think the intelligent design proponents have raised a number of very important questions.
And you wanted to get those questions brought up and discussed.
Placed on the table.
Placed on the table.
People were so upset about it. They were so upset that you could see they had a physical, emotional reaction.
Wow.
They were saying that Stephen C. Meyer is a well-known Christian, that Stephen C. Meyer is an intelligent design proponent, that Stephen C. Meyer is a Republican. It was all couched in terms of religion, politics, and sociology. The way the chair of the department put it is that I was viewed as an intellectual terrorist.
Terrorist?
Because of giving the topic of intelligent design some modicum of credibility.
What happened to Dr. Sternberg was terrible, but surely it was just an isolated case. I was still pretty skeptical, so naturally I checked in with the head of the Skeptics Society, Michael Shermer.
So I can't prove there is no God or Yahweh in your case, any more than I can prove there is no Isis, Zeus, Apollo, Brahma, Ganesha, Mithras, Allah, or for that matter, the flying spaghetti monster. And think about just one thing. Why would the aliens look like this?
Well, that's
these are
who drew that?
bipedal.
Who drew that?
Skepticism, it's not a position you take. It's just an approach to claims.
This one is called the borderlands of science, where sense meets nonsense. Is intelligent design nonsense?
Well, it's unproven. So in that sense, it's nonsense. So I would put it in the sort of shaded areas between good, solid science and total nonsense. You know, it's sort of 3/4 of the way toward the nonsense side.
But you think, nevertheless, people should be allowed to speak about it and publish papers about it?
They are free to write and publish and be heard in public forums and go to conferences just like everybody else does.
Well, what if a person published something, say at the Smithsonian, in favor of intelligent design and then lost his job over it? And it had been peer-reviewed, and published, and then he lost his job over it anyway. What would happen? What do you think about that situation?
I think that particular situation, there was something else going on.
What was going on?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know, because I don't know, but I think there had to be something. People don't get fired over something like that. You roll up your sleeves, you get to work, you do the research, you get your grants, you get your data, you publish, and you work your butt off, and that's how you get your theories taught.
Well, but wait a minute. What if you try and roll up your sleeves and go to work and work your butt off, and they say, well, we're going to fire you if you even mention the word intelligent design?
I don't think that's happening. Where is that happening?
George Mason University. Throughout its 50-year history, our mission has remained clear: to prepare a diverse population of students to think and to grow in a climate of unbridled academic freedom.
After Dr. Caroline Crocker simply mentioned intelligent design in her cell biology class at George Mason University, her promising academic career came to an abrupt end.
My supervisor invited me into his office. He said, I'm going to have to discipline you for teaching creationism. And I said, I mentioned intelligent design on a couple of slides, but I did not teach creationism. He said, nonetheless, you have to be disciplined. At the end of the semester, I lost my job.
Not only did this well-loved professor lose her job at George Mason, she suddenly found herself blacklisted, unable to find a job anywhere.
So whenever I interviewed for a job, I would be offered it, usually on the spot. Since this has happened, and since people can Google my name, I'm finding that when I send my credentials, I do get interviews, I get many interviews, but I never get offered a job. I don't tell them about my science sin. I was only trying to teach what the university stands for, which is academic freedom.
There's nothing to be learned in neurosurgery by assuming an accidental origin for the parts of the brain that we work on.
It wasn't just biologists who were feeling the Darwinist wrath. When neurosurgeon Michael Egnor wrote an essay to high school students saying doctors didn't need to study evolution in order to practice medicine, the Darwinists were quick to try and exterminate this new threat.
A lot of people on a lot of blogs called me unprintable names that were printed. There are a lot of very, very nasty comments. Other people suggested that people call the university I work at and suggested perhaps it's time for me to retire. I realized when I kind of went public with my doubts about the adequacy of Darwin's theory that I would encounter criticism. What has amazed me is the viciousness and the sort of baseness of it.
I'm an old guy. I have tenure. I'm academically safe. But the young people and what is happening to them in America right now because of this scientism gulag is really terrible.
Apparently, Professor Marks was not as safe as he thought. A few months after this interview, Baylor University shut down his research website and forced him to return grant money once they discovered a link between his work and intelligent design.
In order to attract grants, you have to market yourself. So you put up sites and call yourself labs and groups and things like that in order to get visibility. And in my entire experience in academia, I never went to any superior and asked them any permission to put up any of these labs. So the fact that this was singled out, let alone shut down, is jaw-dropping. It's astonishing. I have never been treated like this in my about 30 years in academia.
Shut up, you freak! I say shut up! It's a madhouse!
If you peel back the onion, I think that there's no doubt that the center of this is my work in what some would call intelligent design.
People really get emotional about this. Whenever you say intelligent design in a room of academics, them's fighting words.
Creationists. Astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez found himself in a fierce shootout with Iowa State University following the publication of his book, arguing that the universe is intelligently designed. Despite a stellar research record that has led to the discovery of several planets, his application for tenure was denied, putting his career in jeopardy.
I worried about my tenure a little bit in 2005 when the petition was being circulated because I viewed that as a strategy of Hector Avalos and his associates to try to poison the atmosphere on campus against me because he knew I wasn't tenured yet and I was very vulnerable. I have little doubt that I would have tenure now if I hadn't done any professional work on intelligent design.
Dr. Gonzalez had this advice for scientists who might be thinking about following his example.
If they value their careers, they should keep quiet about their intelligent design views.
We know there are times and places to be quiet, and other times and places when we can make noise if we want to.
Will you show us?
Of course. Boys and girls, how would you like to show some of the ways we know of being quiet?
It's the kind of thing where you just learn to keep your mouth shut.
In addition to those scientists who were willing to appear on camera, we encountered many more who didn't dare show their face for fear of losing their jobs.
You use an intelligent design perspective to get the research done, but you're not allowed to talk about it in public.
And so there is definitely incentive, if you think about it, for people to remain within the mainstream.
You know, what's he up to? What is he thinking? Is he one of them? That kind of thing.
If I write intelligent design, they hear creationism. They hear religious right. They hear theocracy.
So it appears Mr. Shermer, the self-styled skeptic, was wrong on this one. Intelligent design was being suppressed in a systematic and ruthless fashion. But maybe intelligent design should be suppressed. I didn't like what was happening to these scientists, but on the other hand, we don't want our kids being taught that the Earth is flat or that the Holocaust never happened. It was time to ask the scientific establishment what was so bad about intelligent design.
Intelligent design people are not genuine scientists.
Intelligent design is a racket. It's just propaganda.
The only intelligent thing about it is to have got people to call it that.
It's really very stupid as well. Everybody knows science education in America is appalling. What we don't need at this time is intelligent design in the classrooms.
To present intelligent design stunts their educational growth. It stunts their intellectual growth.
But what I don't understand is how these animals could have been on Earth millions of years before man. And the Bible says the whole Earth was created in only 6 days.
It wasn't just the educational aspects of intelligent design that had scientists concerned. Many suspected the movement masked a much larger agenda.
Intelligent design.
إن أعجبك الفيديو لا تنسى الإعجاب والاشتراك في القناة.